Today's conversation is in English. Um, I don't know what that means. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes not so much. But uh, let's see. Miss Muna, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. We're almost there. If we could get close to 100, we will begin. All right. We're almost there, guys. And also make sure to like. Uh, there's only 2,000 likes so far on the top left corner. Make sure to like as well. Um, my YouTube is my channel, my name, Dawit Muluna. You will find it under my name. All right, so let's go ahead and begin today's conversation. So I thought about like what I wanted to do today, and just so I get an idea, how many people are like following this weekly? If you could give me a thumbs up, so I can understand like if I'm talking to a new crowd or the crowd that's been coming regularly learning. Give me a thumbs up if you've been okay WT33. Appreciate it. Who's been coming regularly? Like regularly meaning at least 2-3 sessions you've seen. You guys have been here. New crowd here. Welcome, Effie. No worries. Give me a thumbs up if you've been here 2 or 3 times at least. All right, we got a lot of shy ones. That's okay. Um, so the idea here is we are okay, Biniam Samuel. Uh, welcome. Um, okay. So the idea behind this kind of live that I've been doing it for quite some not a long time, but about like this is my 5th or 6th week coming in live, and I'm trying to do one in English, one in Amharic. The Amharic is usually Saturdays. The English ones I alternate between Wednesday and Thursday depending on my schedule. It does take a lot to prepare, so that's partly why. So the idea is to learn about history, specifically Ethiopian history. And I'm starting off with the premise that our way of interpreting history needs work. It needs work. And what I've been doing here is I've been doing my best to represent two different worlds that are often at odds with each other. One of the world is the tradition. So as you guys could see, the way that I'm dressed, I'm a deacon of the church. This is a concept that I'm not ashamed of. It's something that I put up front. I'm a deacon within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. I'm also a student of history. I love history. I like talking about history. And that's what I do. I'm a student. I'm a PhD student. I'm learning. But I take scholarship very seriously. And one of the things that I've seen in the past is people who are of the tradition or the traditionalists, they often kind of, look down upon scholarship, and the ones who are doing scholarship look down on tradition. And my thing is, wait a minute, why is that the case? Why can't we get these two worlds to communicate so that we can have the best understanding of like the fuller picture? We could appreciate the tradition, appreciate the scholarship, and try to bring it and get together and see what we can learn. um, even though I'm of the tradition, I try to be as objective as possible in my analysis. And as many times as possible, I'll give you the tradition, and then I'll juxtapose it with the scholarship. So we've had several conversations like this, and underneath it all, I really want to see if we can have a healthy dialogue where people come and really push back. The past 2 weeks were kind of contentious in some regard, and especially when we were looking at the relationship of Egypt and Ethiopia. There were a lot of pushbacks, and that's kind of what I want. I want these kind of hard questions, right? Um, some people, my aim is not really to convince anyone, but is to educate you of the ideas that are out there, and let's begin a conversation. And I think we did that. I think it was effective, and I hope people learned. Um, and today, I hope to do the same thing. But there's one question that I get the most. It's the question of, um, what's the deal with the Ethiopian Bible, right? Like, what's the deal with it? What's going on with it? Can you talk about it? So that's what I want to do today. Is I want to talk about the Bible and talk about what it is, and why the Ethiopian canon is different. So the first thing that we have to understand is the word Bible comes from the Greek word ta biblia, and biblia is the plural form for books. So biblia could really be thought of as a library. So when we're talking about the Bible, we have to understand we're talking about a library. And if we're not really aware of the reception of the Bible, the greatest error you can make is to treat it as a book instead of a library that contains and houses various numbers of books. When we talk about the Ethiopian Bible, or the Protestant Bible or the Catholic Bible, you have to forgive me today. I'm exhausted, but I came in. I said I was gonna do this live. I wanted to make sure to do this live. I was so close to not doing it, but no, I said I was gonna do it. I'm here, but I'm a little lethargic. I'm still trying to wake up, so forgive me. I've been working nonstop all day. So if I'm losing my train of thought, that's why. I'm doing my best, I promise. So when it comes to the Bible, one of the things that people misunderstand is when we talk about the Ethiopian Bible, the Protestant Bible, the Catholic Bible, we're not talking about like completely different Bibles, right? What we really mean is if we take the word Bible to mean library, which is the connotation, then we're saying which library are we going to, right? And when you walk into a library, each library could look different. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's being recorded on YouTube. Whenever I stop, it saves the recording. So whenever you walk into a library, you can have different books, or sometimes you can have the same type of books. For example, 7 Habits of Most Effective People, or whatever. You could find that book at multiple libraries. Same book, different library. What's going to be different about each library is some libraries are smaller and house smaller books, and other libraries are really big and they house bigger books. So when we're talking about, again, the Bible, but we're saying the Ethiopian Bible, the Orthodox Bible, the Protestant Bible, what we really mean is how many books are there? and which ones are the right ones. And we're going to try to see the development of how canonization took place. That is, how people came to understand how many books should be in this library we call the Bible. I hope that makes sense. We're going to start our conversation in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You've got to understand, like, we've heard these things so many times that when you hear the verse, you're like, yeah, sure, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. But this was remarkable claim by the Jews, written, I think, around 3,500 years ago. This was a remarkable claim to say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. Was groundbreaking. Anyone reading the Bible at that time would have been shocked by the claim that the Jews were making, precisely because at the time there were many attempts to describe how the world came about. How did we come here? But many of the attempts to describe the world began with a story after the ultimate Genesis. And they started with this idea that God had other gods, or he had like other helpers, or he brought in his friends to come to this world, and a lot of Greek mythology and philosophy about how we came here. But no one dared to claim to have the knowledge of the beginning. This was groundbreaking claim by the Jews. Anyone reading it at the time period, given the historical kind of understanding of the world, would have been awestruck by this claim that in the beginning, it was God that created the heavens and the world and the earth. This was a major claim. Hence, after this, the story continues. I'm not here to give you like kind of a sermon or anything, but you've got to really appreciate like what the Bible is. And it was making kind of like headways in philosophy and literature by making this kind of grand statements at the time. Sure, now we hear it all day, every day. God created the heaven and earth. But back then, someone would have stopped and said, "What did you say?" They would have really been shocked by these claims that the Jews were making. And these, of course, became the holy books. And these holy books were entrusted to the Israelites, and they were commissioned by God to hold on to these texts. They were making, again, remarkable claims about the world. But when we read the Bible, again, I'm not here to preach today. I'm going to give you the kind of the historical understanding or reception of the Bible and how the canonization came about. But I think this is really good information for us to have. And when we read the Bible, we begin to understand that the Israelites were not faithful to God. At least, again, I'm going to approach it from a historical claim, a historical place, not making religious claims. So from a historical place, if you read the Bible, you begin to see that the Israelites, they weren't following what God was telling them to do. So in 2 Kings chapter 25, something amazing happens. The same Israelites that were entrusted by God to preserve these holy texts were handed over to the enemy, the Babylonians. The Babylonians come, they besiege the city, and worst of all, they destroy the temple of God. This was a punch in the gut. This was a big deal because it disturbed the Jewish way of life and understanding of what their life was supposed to be. The history of the Israelites was effectively broken. This was a major part in their history. They went over to Babylon. Babylon was crushed by Persia, and suddenly the Persian king allowed them to go back to Israel. I'm again. This is not a sermon, right? So I get to skip things around. And the Israelites were told that they could go back to their city. When they went back to Israel, they began to rebuild the city, to rebuild the temple, and they made the second temple. And something remarkable happens. Again, I'm not here to give you a sermon. I'm here to give you a historical context while kind of following through the theme of scripture. So in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 1 through 8, it says the following. This is after the Israelites went back to Israel. In Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 1 through 8, it says, all the people assembled with a unified purpose at the square just inside the water gate. They asked Ezra, the scribe, to bring out the book of the law of Moses. These are the first 5 books of the Old Testament we know now to be Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So they asked Ezra, the scribe, to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given for Israel to obey. They read from the book of the law of God, from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and clearly explained the meaning, what was being read, helping the people understand each passage. So from Nehemiah chapter 8, we could infer that because they were taken away to Babylon under a siege, they had forgotten their history. They've forgotten who they were. So there was a need to remind the people of what the book of the law was. You are the Israelites. This is who you are. Oh, by the way, these texts we know are the book of the law of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. From the Bible, we see that the Bible was being read. Does that make sense? So this kind of marks a very critical point in the Israelites' history, where we are beginning to see what we call canonization of how people are interacting with the texts themselves. So in the book of Nehemiah chapter 8, we see the Israelites referring back to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. For a historian, this is a very important verse because it lets him know that at least from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, people were reading and interacting with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy as inspired holy book of texts, at least within the Jewish texts. So again, time frame, we are in the 500 BCE, before Christ. BCE, 500 years before Christ. And at this time, something happens, which is there is a growth of what we call Hellenization. And you can kind of think of it in modern times as being westernized. This is like in our modern day, this is people speaking English, having Western mindset, listening to popular Western music, for kind of letting go of their own culture. A lot of the things that we were seeing were happening 500 years before Christ came, and which led to people kind of forgetting Hebrew language. So the Old Testament, up until Ezra and Nehemiah, 500 years before Christ came, the Bible was written in a language we know to be Hebrew, with very rare exceptions of Aramaic in the book of Daniel. Other than that, nearly entirely, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. But the Hebrew language was what was being used as the Abjad system. The Abjad system is a system that a lot of Semitic languages use, like Syriac, like Arabic, and at once upon a time, like Ge'ez, that only has characters to represent the consonants. So that's why they call it Abjad, right? But language, any language in the world needs vowels. Think about it. So if you're using consonants only, language would sound like you can't talk unless you bring in vowels, which in English we call them A-E-I-O-U. And you have ah, you, ba, be, boo. And this is what kind of gives you your vowel system. And in Hebrew, there was no way to represent these vowels. Instead, you just had the consonants, which made it very difficult to read. So people said, look, there's Greek coming, and Greek letters had vowel systems. And people were kind of emerging themselves into Greek. So they said, we should probably translate the Old Testament. And that's exactly what they did. In around the 300 years prior to Christ, 300 years prior to Christ, in Alexandria, Ptolemy II of Philadelphia's commissioned people. The tradition is he commissioned six scholars from each one of the 12 tribes to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek, giving you a total of 72 people. Hence the Latin word Septuaginta, which means 70, but it's really 72 because it's six scholars from each one of the 12 tribes to translate the Old Testament into Greek. Before I say more, it's important to understand that as far as the Old Testament from Genesis up until Ezra and Nehemiah, there are outside sources that corroborates some of the things that are written. A lot of times, like modern period, this may not be a problem for the Ethiopian, but especially here in the Western world, people are like, well, the Bible's not true. It's outdated. Like nothing written has been confirmed. It's just not true. That's not the scholarship. Actually, there's a lot of archaeological evidences that corroborate some of the stories that are written in the Old Testament. One of which is the Misha Stele. Give me 1 second while I share it with my people on Facebook. Okay. So the Misha Stele was discovered in 1868 in Jordan. And you guys could see it here. And why it's important is because it talks about King Omri, who is a king described in 2 Kings chapter 3. So this archaeological evidence that shows, or it's dated to around 840 BCE, is corroborating some of the things written in the Old Testament. It's not only this, we have the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III, again discovered in the mid 1800s, and there's some discrepancies there, but there are certain things, at least it mentions some people that are also cited in the Bibles, which is showing you at the time where the Bible is written, there were things archaeologically which were corroborating what the Bible was saying was happening. So this goes to show you that no, outside of the Bible, we have material that can confirm some of the claims that the Bible is making. All right. I don't know what's going on YouTube these days. I'm getting a lot of comments that I don't know where these comments are coming from, but I'm gonna keep going nevertheless. All right, back to Greek. So we have. Oh wow, okay. So we have people. So in the 300 years before Christ came, the Bible that was written in Hebrew was translated into Greek. But after Ezra's period, or even after things were translated into Greek and the Hellenistic period came, and things kept happening, so people kept writing. Like when Ezra and Nehemiah, they went back to Israel, they wrote about it. They were like, hey, this is kind of important. We should write about it. The same way that when things kept happening, people kept writing. But the only difference is, this is going to be critical in a second, Because Hebrew language was outdated, people were writing in Greek. That was the difference. Prior to third century BCE or 500, but by the time of Ezra, people always wrote in Hebrew when they wanted to write anything. I'm talking about the Jews. The Jews would write in Hebrew. But after that period, when Hellenization came and Greek culture came, instead of writing in Hebrew, they started writing in Greek, and this becomes very important. One such case is the Maccabees. Maccabees were a family that revolted against the Hellenistic period because they said, wait a minute, our culture is disappearing, our identity is disappearing. We can't just sit back and do nothing. And as a family, they revolted and said, we've got to take a stand. And they did their best to reserve the Jewish tradition for their community. Because this was such a big event, they wrote about it. But again, at the time, the language of choice to write was Greek, so they wrote about it in Greek. I don't know what happened here. Let me fix my notes. By the way, we have a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm trying to go quickly. I apologize if I'm doing that again. Like I said, I'm exhausted, but I wanted to make sure I stay here and do this for everyone because I know there are people really following this. All right. So then we get to Maccabees. Things happen. Romans come. And again, I'm kind of picking up the story. And of course, our Lord, our Savior, our King, Christ comes. And he comes to his own, but his own did not accept him. And then they crucify him. They beat him. He's killed. And then he resurrects. And the disciples afterwards, they write what happened. This is a major event. So they begin to write again in Greek because it's the Greek language. And they begin to write. They write. And that's it. Now, there's a lot of debate. If you guys kind of like, I don't know if you care about this or not, but it's worth adding. Like, if you read scholarship, there's this debate about are the New Testaments, like, when were they written? And a lot of people are like, we can't really trust the New Testament because the New Testament was written like centuries afterwards and they're unreliable and all these things. And I'm like, wait a minute. If you look and if you really read between the lines, the New Testament has got to be written before 70 AD. I want you guys to remember this. For next time somebody's like, how do we know how to, like, why should we trust the Bible? Or wasn't the Bible written later or anything like that? No, the Bible must have been written before 70 AD. How do we know? I'll tell you how we know. 70 AD, another remarkable thing happens. Those of you who want to come to the live, you're allowed to come in. I just ask that you mute your mics so that we can finish the lesson, and then you can ask during the Q&A session. So the at 70 AD, well, leading up to 70 AD, right before, there was big tension between the Jews and the Romans. The Jews and the Romans, mainly about tax. That's why they asked him about tax to Christ, and the tension blew up. I don't want to get into the detail, but at the end of the day, nobody really knows how it started. But people think it was the Romans. Most likely the Romans. They set the temple on fire. The second temple. This is the temple, like the temple of the Israelites, and it burns down completely. It burns down completely. When? 70 AD. Why is this important? Why is this significant? Well, it was huge in Jewish culture, but why is it important to us? And why do we care about the timing of the Bible? Well, here's the thing. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 1 through 2, Christ said the temple would be destroyed. He says the following: as Jesus was leaving the temple, the day That day, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings." He's talking about the temple. "Look at the impressive stones in the walls." Jesus replied, "Yes, look at these great buildings, but they will be completely demolished. Not one stone would be left on top of another." Here's the point. This is, by the way, tantamount to me going down to Washington, D.C., standing before all the senators and all like reporters and all that stuff, and me pointing to the White House and saying the White House will be destroyed. People are gonna laugh. People are like, "This guy's crazy. Like, what is he talking about? The White House is gonna fall. It's gonna burn." Okay, like this guy is insane. Like nothing's well, the White House, like the White House, really, like really. But imagine if it actually burned down. If it completely was destroyed. Suddenly, people are gonna be like, "Who is that guy? Like that guy's kind of important. What knowledge did he have? He must have known something. How in the world was he able to say the White House is gonna like burn and get destroyed? What?" Right? So obviously people would talk about it because it was a major claim that I was making. Christ was making even a bigger claim because the temple meant more to the Jews than the White House ever did to the Americans. It was a major part of their identity. And just like he said, the temple was destroyed. Here's the point. If the Bible was written after the temple was destroyed, surely the same disciples that are trying to tell the world that Christ is the Son of God would have included it in their writings. They would have said, "Look, you know how Christ is God? He said the temple would be destroyed. And look outside your window. Do you see a temple? No." This would have been one of the most convincing arguments that the Jews could have used in their Bible. But they didn't. They didn't write about it. You don't find it. It talks about how the temple will be destroyed, but not once, no mention of the temple being destroyed. On the other hand, you find a lot of events occurring in the Bible. It talks about the king Herod's coming in and another king being so the Bible is aware of the current events that are happening in Roman culture, definitely in Jewish culture, but not one mention of the temple being destroyed. This lets scholars know the Bible must have been written before 70 AD. This is why this is important. But the burning of the temple is not just important for our discussion of the Bible when it was written. It's important for another reason, and that is the Jewish canon being built. So keep in mind, we're talking about Rome, we're talking about Jewish culture, and there was tension. So the temple is destroyed. They don't know what to do. They're like an awestruck, the Jews. They're like, "What just happened? This is our temple. What is meaning of life? Like, what is anything?" So they run. They go out hiding. They leave like their area. They leave Jerusalem. They go hiding, and they go to a region named Jamnia. And they're in Jamnia, and they begin to like now they're kind of calm and they have time to reflect. Again, like big questions are being asked. What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of anything? Like, what is the temple? And people begin to ask the question, what is like inspired scripture? Like, what is our holy books? Like, what are they? Like, really, what are they? Because keep in mind, at the time, there were many books being circulated. So they're like, how do we know which ones are of God and which ones are not? And given everything that happened, they're like, we need to start recording things. We need to be very serious about who we are and our culture. And they had a council in Jamnia to determine which books were holy and which books were not. Now, I should say, current scholarship has walked away from the concept of a formalized council known as Jamnia taking place in the city of Jamnia. Albeit, there was an informal discussion happening in Jamnia. So when I refer to Jamnia, this has happened before, people think I'm talking to a formalized council where people come into like a building. They're like, hear ye, we now therefore convene, and we will speak about the holy books here in Jamnia on this day forth. That didn't happen, likely, or we don't have evidence of it taking place, but we do have evidence that conversations, criterias were being built to describe and understand which books were considered to be holy. This I want everyone to write down. I want all of you guys to write this down, because this is going to be the kind of like the heartbeat of everything else that I'm going to talk about. I'll wait until you guys get like a paper and pencil. It's not going to hurt you. Don't write it on your phone. Get a piece of paper, a pen, or something, and I want you guys to write this down. So whenever anyone asks you from now on, you'll have an answer ready to go. All right, and give me a thumbs up when you do have a paper and pencil. Give me a thumbs up so I'll know when to begin. Give me a thumbs up. All right, the vintage mom. Minas, yay! I love the black finger. Black power, hoorah! Let me get a thumbs up when you guys have paper and pencil. GHIRO. I don't know how to pronounce that. Oh, ZX something something man G box. Okay. YouTube stepping up. FSNB something groom. Okay. Akia. Thumbs up right back. Okay, so let's go on. 2-piece and a biscuit. Thumbs up. Okay. So here's the thing. There were 3 criterias that were used to determine which ones are holy and which ones are not. 3 criterias. I can't emphasize this enough. These criterias are being built by Jewish scholars. They're not Christian. They're not Ethiopian. They're not Orthodox. They're Jewish folks determining which holy books, which books are considered holy Jewish texts. Okay, this is important. They're trying to determine which books are considered holy for the Jewish community. 3 criteria. Number 1, they said the texts to be considered holy have to be written after Moses, but before Ezra. I'll repeat that. The texts to be considered holy have to be written after Moses, but before Ezra. And some people came together and they said, okay. And they're gathering the texts. I'm kind of finessing this a little bit, but you guys get the point. And then they get to the book of Enoch. And they're like, wait a minute. What about the book of Enoch? All right. When did Enoch exist? He existed before Moses. Doesn't make the cut. It doesn't make the cut. Why? Because it's written before Moses. X. Next. Okay, second criteria. It must be written in the Hebrew language. It must be written in the Hebrew language. They said, okay, Hebrew language, got it. Before, after Moses, before Ezra, got it. They started gathering texts. They come across Maccabees, written in Greek. They said, what about the book of Maccabees? This was important in our life. It's not written in Hebrew. We can't use it. But this is really important. It doesn't matter. We could read it, we could remember it, but it won't be considered Holy Scripture. The final criteria. The subject of the text must be about God. The subject of the text must be about God. Again, first, it must be after Moses, before Ezra. 2, it must be in Hebrew. And 3, it must be about God. Here, the book of Aster was problematic because Aster, believe it or not, I don't know how many of you guys know this, it doesn't invoke the name God or Lord in the text, the one written in Hebrew. It doesn't have the word God. It doesn't have the word Lord. So they debated about this. They had an intense debate. But eventually they understood that it was about Jewish customs, religious practices, so it made the cut. Based on these 3 criterias, 24 texts were elected and believed to have been inspired by God. Okay, now I want you guys to write how many books we're going to have quizzes today. How many books did Jewish scholars elect to be considered as holy inspired texts for the Jewish community? How many texts? I'm going to ask you guys a question. IKEA Zimmata. 24. Okay. Perfect. Second question. 24. Tanakab. Oh, Minas. I see somebody did theology. Okay. Here's another question. Who were the ones who decided that these texts were holy? Who decided this? I know lifestyle, but you would be shocked sometimes. Sometimes it's difficult. Jewish scholars. The Jewish scholars. Yes. These are not Christians. These are not Orthodox. They're Jewish scholars. They're not just scholars. They're Jewish scholars that were deciding which text should be considered holy for the Jewish tradition. Here's the takeaway message. Well, first of all, some clarity. 24 texts are considered holy. However, according to the Jewish tradition, certain books we now consider as independent books were considered to be one book. For example, 1st, 2nd Samuel was counted as one singular book. There was no such thing as 1st and 2nd Samuel. There was no such thing as 1st and 2nd Kings. That was considered as one book. There was no such thing as 1st and 2nd Chronicles. There was no such thing. It was just Chronicles. And some of the ordering, the 12 minor prophets were counted as one book. They weren't like individual books. People didn't consider them to be like separate individual texts, but they considered them to be one major book. Therefore, when you add up all these things, or rather, if you count these as individual books, like 1st Samuel is one book, 2nd Samuel is one book, and so on and so forth, the total number of books they really called inspired by God were 39 books, corresponding with the 39 books of the Old Testament that the Protestant Church currently uses. All of this analysis is to say this is how and I'm going to get back into it later on, but just for right now. So when the Protestants say we use 39 books, what they're really saying is for the Old Testament, we are relying on what the Jews said was inspired by God. We trust what the Jews scholars said. Let's keep going. By the end of the first century, there were many people who began to circulate many of the New Testament texts. People like Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, before the first century, were citing the texts from the New Testament. And around the 4th century, Jerome does something remarkable. So he does the 3rd translation. This time he translates it into Latin, but he doesn't translate the Greek into Latin. He translates the Hebrew into Latin. But then he does something different and weird. After translating these texts from Hebrew into Latin, he goes back to the Greek. And he translates books like 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Keep in mind, this was in Greek language, but he translates that into Latin as well. And then in the Vulgate Bible, which is the Latin Bible, he has the Old Testament, 39 books, the New Testament, which was 27 at a time, and then he had 7 additional deuterocanonical books, kind of like at the end saying, oh, by the way, these are considered to be secondary books. This is Tobit, Judith, addition to Esther, Wisdom, Syriac, Baruch, letter of Jeremiah, additions to Daniel, and 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So these 7 texts were added to the end of the Bible, which was so confusing at the time because people were like, wait a minute, what's happening? Are these like holy books? Are they not holy books? At the same time, there were other texts. Oh, am I here? I'm getting a phone call, so I don't know if kicked me out. Am I here? Yes, give me a thumbs up on TikTok. It kicked me out. Okay, good. So at the same time, right after the 1st century, a group of people known as Gnostics, they had like their own kind of philosophy and idea about God, and they were doing things, and there were other texts being written, things like the Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Jesus, Gospel of Peter. And we know these things were written much later on. I'm not going to get into the full analysis, but right now, the only thing to keep in mind is this began to be confusing to the layman. So then the church scholars, these Christian scholars, came together and said, let's canonize the Bible. Remember, but Biblia, library. So they said, okay, there are many books coming in and out. We have to recognize what books we define to be inspired by God and which ones are not inspired by God. So in 393, in the Council of Hippo, they came together and said, we're going to canonize the Bible to let you know, Bible Think Library, what books to keep inside your library. And they said, have 2 sections, one old, one new. And the old, we want you to have 46 books. That is 39 of the books that the Old Testament Jewish scholars had approved, and the 7 additional one that Jerome had added into the back of the book. And then there was the 27 in the new, giving a grand total of 73 books. This is where the canon of the Catholic Church came about in Council of Hippo in 393 AD. Now, fast forward. Like I said, we were fast forwarding. Oh, 393. I don't know what I said. Did I say 397? There was another council in 397, but the Council of Hippo was 393 AD. Minas. Thank you if I messed up on that. I said, it's a long day. Um, and afterwards, there was still a lot of confusion, at least for some people. But then we have in the 16th century, I'm fast forwarding to about 1,000 years later. Of course, we have the Reformation. The Protestants come and they're like, we don't like these 7 additional books. Nah, we don't like them. We trust the Jews. We trust the Jews. These are Old Testament texts. These are Old Testament books. So whatever the Jews say, we should take their word for it. We're only going to accept the 39. Then there was another debate that was born. Do we get rid of the 7? Do we accept the 7? Do we throw it away? What do we do with it? Then they started going back into the Bible and recognizing that a lot of the New Testament authors were citing part of these 7 deuterocanonical books. For example, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 through 7 appears to be citing from the book of Wisdom, chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. So when analyzing these things, they said, wait a minute, if these New Testament scholars are referencing these 7 deuterocanonical texts, and we accept that these New Testament scholars, why can't we use them? We should be able to use it. It doesn't make any sense. So they kept these 7 deuterocanonical books, and in Council of Trent, it was again reestablished of the Catholic biblical canon, which is 73 books. I'm not really familiar with the Eastern Orthodox version, but I think they have 4 or 5 extra books to what the Catholic Church has. But all of this conversation was taking place in Europe. Way over there. Way over there. This wasn't the conversation that was happening in Ethiopia. Keep in mind, Beta is, are you saying that Eastern Orthodox has 76? Okay. It also depends on how they count. The counting system is different. So, but I'll take your word for it. So in Ethiopia, the way that they canonize is a little bit different because there wasn't this like Protestant movement that occurred in Ethiopia, at least, not in the 1500s or definitely not earlier on. So the theology or the philosophy of the Ethiopians was simple. Mainly, if they were in the tradition, we're going to use it. And there wasn't this talk of, because the Jews used it, we should use it too. Like, that philosophy didn't exist in Ethiopia. Instead, they said, we should accept the texts that the New Testament scholars used. One of the things that we have to understand about the Ethiopian Bible is the following. Number one, no matter what people tell you, I've had this conversation so many times. The Ge'ez Bible is translated from Greek to Ge'ez. I'll repeat that. The Ge'ez Bible is translated from Ge'ez to Greek. It was not translated from Hebrew. There are many claims that people make about what they think of what they wanted to be, but that's just not what happened. And these are part of the things that I'm like, we should push back on the tradition a little bit because the facts are just not there to back it up. And it's not dogma, it's not doctrine, it's not canon, it's just history. We've got to correct this view that the Ge'ez Bible is somehow related with the Hebrew Bible. I could get into detail and showing you all these things, but instead I'll do kind of an overview presentation of this. So let's look at this. This is the Bible from the book of Psalms. I don't read Hebrew, so I'm not going to post the Hebrew up here. but I do read English. And by the way, the New American Standard Bible, as far as my knowledge, is perhaps the best Hebrew to English translation. Like it keeps the word order and all that stuff, right? So let's look at this. The book of Psalms, chapter 40, verse 6 through 8, it says the following: You have not desired sacrifice and meal offering. You have opened my ears. You have opened my ears. You've not required burnt offering and sin offering. Then I said, Behold, I have come. It is written of me in the scroll of the book. I delight to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart. This is from the Hebrew to English. Let's look at this exact verse, but in Greek. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. All right, you guys can see it, right? A sacrifice, thusian, kai prosphoron, offering, you wanted not, but a body you readied. There's no body here. It talks about you have opened my ears. But in the Greek, it says, but a body you have readied to me. Whole burnt offerings and sacrifice for sin. So you've not required burnt offering and sin offering. Okay, I'll just stop there. I could keep going, but I won't. The major difference. What do you guys see? What is the difference? What do you guys see? You tell me what you see. Between this text, this text. What are some differences that you guys see? Here's the Hebrew. Here's the Greek. Here's the. You guys don't see a difference, or you can't see it. What's it like? What are some words that pop out to you? That's in the Greek. Okay, open my ears versus but a body. Beta is very good. A body you readied. Prahna Selassie, very good. Okay. And that's correct. Here, soma, body, is not in the Hebrew. Let's look at the Ge'ez. Now, you guys don't know how to, you may not know how to read Ge'ez, but I'll translate. Meswaita wa qurbana ifaqadku. I did not desire an offering, and qurban here also means another type of like offering. Sigaka ansah lita, cleanse my body. Okay. I don't know what's going on. Okay, guys. If you guys could share the likes, there are things that are. I'm getting warnings that it's gonna shut me out. So if you guys could share and like, I don't know this thing that TikTok has been doing. I'm not sure what's going on. But on TikTok, if you guys could share and do the likes. Thank you. I'm getting warnings. Okay, so sigaka ans lita, your flesh, or cleanse your flesh from me, or you have cleansed your flesh from me. Is that closer to the Hebrew or the Greek? The Ge'ez says, Sigaka ansahlita, you have cleansed your flesh from me. Is that closer to the Hebrew or the Greek? Close to the Greek. That's correct. Closer to the Greek. What this tells you, and you could keep doing analysis like this, is that the Ge'ez has got to be translated from the Greek and not the Hebrew. Now, a lot of people, when they hear this, they're like, wait a minute, but Hebrew, original language, does that mean that the Ge'ez Bible is wrong because it was translated from the Greek and they're using the Greek Bible and not the Hebrew Bible? And what does that mean? And whatever. So yes, I can repeat that again, Lily. The Ge'ez has the word body, which is what the Greek has, and the Hebrew doesn't have it. So we can say the Hebrew, the Ge'ez is translated from Greek and not the Hebrew Bible. Now, here's the thing, guys. Like I said, a lot of people that kind of makes them nervous. And they're like, wait a minute, how could this be? Why are we using Greek Bibles and not the Hebrew one? But check this out. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 5 through 7, it says, therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, you've not desired a sacrifice and offering, but you have prepared a body for me. What do you think he's doing here? St. Paul is referencing the book of Psalms, chapter 40, 6 through 7. Paul is referencing the book of Psalms, chapter 40, verses 6 through 7. This is the book of Hebrews. It's in the New Testament. But look what Paul is referencing. He can't be referencing the Hebrew because the Hebrew says, you have opened my ears. But that's not what Paul is saying. Paul is saying what the Ge'ez is saying, Sigaka Ansahlita, and this is coming from the Greek. So the thing that we notice is that yes, the Ge'ez Bible is using the Greek translation, that is the Septuagint. Yes, Ge'ez is translated from the Septuagint. Absolutely, 100%. That's what I'm showing here, 100%. And we could have more conversations on it. So here, what we learn is even the New Testament scholars, or the New Testament authors, like Paul, is referencing the Greek and not the Hebrew. Not to say that there's something wrong with the Hebrew. Of course, the Greek is dependent on it. But we are using the Greek Bible, just like Paul is using. There's nothing wrong with it. But that's not the only thing. When we come to the book of Jude, chapter 1, it only has one chapter, verse 14, this New Testament author is also using or referencing someone named Enoch. If you guys recall, the book of Enoch was rejected based on this idea that it was written before Moses. But Jude, who is a New Testament author, is referencing Enoch, and he gives the citation. In the 17th generation from Adam, prophesied saying, behold, the Lord has come with many thousands of his holy ones. Jude is referencing from the book of Enoch that we find in section 1, chapter 1, verse 9. And behold, he comes with myriads of holy to pass judgment upon them. So here's the thinking. Here's the philosophy. If Jude, who is a New Testament author that we've said is being inspired by the Word of God, is referencing Enoch, how come we don't accept Enoch? I'll repeat that. If Jude, who's believed to be inspired by God, is referencing the book of Enoch, why don't we accept the book of Enoch? So based on this premise, the Ethiopian canon accepted 46 books in the Old Testament and 35 books in the New Testament, giving a grand total of 81 books of canon. Now, one of the things that we've got to understand is the following. The counting system of the Bible canon in Ethiopia is different. It mimics, it's not identical, it mimics the Jewish culture in that First and Second Samuel is counted as one, not two. First and Second Kings, First, Second Chronicles are counted as individual books. For this reason, the counting system is different. And if you counted them individually, you actually have more than 81 books in the Bible. But using the counting system that is mimicking the Jewish culture, the official canon of the Ethiopian comes to a grand total of 81 books. And these 81 books come from a mindset in Ethiopia that say, if the New Testament scholars and authors who are believed to be inspired by God are referencing the book of Enoch, why can't we reference the book of Enoch? The other thing is, the philosophy of saying that 39 books of the Old Testament are inspired by God comes from a philosophy that says the Jewish community that made their canon for the Jewish community were correct. But why is that the logical step? Why is that necessarily so? Why is it that the Jewish community are absolutely correct in what books are considered holy, not just for the Jewish community, but for Christian community? I don't know why that's necessarily true. And then when you push back a little bit and you look at the criteria that the Jewish community made in order to canonize the Old Testament, why is it that it has to be written after Moses and before Ezra? Where's the logical step behind that? I never understood, why is that necessarily true? For a book to be inspired by God, it must be written after Moses, but before Ezra. And then they said it must be written in the Hebrew language. Why is that necessarily true? I saw somebody saying, wait a minute, what about the book of Daniel? The book of Daniel has parts that are written in the book of Aramaic. And I said that before. And that is another point, isn't it? If they really believe that, then the book of Daniel has to go. So that wraps up today's class. If you guys have questions, you can feel free to come live and ask questions. I'll be staying around a little bit. I'm a little tired today, but I'll take on questions, a few questions. Hopefully, they're engaging questions. Brahana Selassie has kicked it off. And he said, which English version is closest to the Septuagint? Is it NKJV or KJV? Neither. The closest English translation is net. I can never remember what that stands for. Bible, Greek, English, net. Or is it nets? Oi. Yeah, I have to get back to you. I thought it was NET. Nets. Yes, nets. I keep forgetting. Nets. I have to remember. NETS, New English Translation of the Septuagint. That's what nets mean. Thank you. Thank you, user. Thank you. Yes. All right. Other questions? Gurum21, welcome. Do you have any questions?
Diakon David, Kaleo Tesamale.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. I have a different question, but let's hear from them and then.
Okay. Okay.
Salam Diakon. I just have two questions.
Sure.
The first one is why did, when they created those three criteria, one of the criteria was for the books between Moses to Ezra?
Mm-hmm.
They choose that time period. Why did they have a specific reason? What was the reason for them to?
Yeah, Moses was
Ezra as the end.
Yeah, Moses is considered to be a major prophet. So is Ezra. Ezra is seen as a kind of a major figure. So they said, who's greater than Moses? I guess they could have said Abraham, but yeah. So that was kind of the ideology. Was like, okay, Moses is pretty important. So is Ezra. So we'll just cut it off there.
And the second question is a follow-up. I might have missed it, but what was the the time period where they create this?
When did they do it? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Right after the fall of the temple in 70 AD, so sometime around the 1st or 2nd century CE, after Christ, Common Era. Does that answer your question? All right. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. 10K.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Yeah, I don't have anything to say, but I just want to say, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I see you a lot on social media, brother, so, keep doing what you're doing, man. You're doing a lot of good things.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
100%, man.
Appreciate it. All right. I guess, Groom, you could go for it. Sorry. So Lazarus, you can. Usually people come on TikTok. So if you want to come on TikTok and ask questions, you can do that. Okay, good one. Go ahead.
David, I have completely different question from the topic. That's why I'm just waiting for them, and then I'll ask at the end, if that's okay.
Okay. I don't see other people coming in. If people come in, they could ask questions. There's no questions right now. So
did you see like Lily said something?
I did it. It's hard for me to read these messages. Astrology forbidden in the Bible. That's I guess kind of off topic. So I won't be addressing it right now. But there's a difference between astrology and astronomy, right? One is a science, one is like kind of made up, kind of like what is it? So based on these signs, we could tell who we are or whatever, like that kind of philosophy. And I believe it's astrology. We do not kind of accept, but astronomy as a science with the stars and everything like that, we do accept it. Superstition. Thank you. People are asking about aliens, so this is really out there. Fiqh gospel.
Hey Declan, how's it going?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Okay. My question would be on the topic. This is another interesting topic which needs a lot of reading again. So
Yeah.
that's why I love your presentations, because it needs a lot of research and a lot of reading. So my question would be, the Old Testament or the Old Testament canon is given for the Jewish. So I think we can agree on that.
Mhm.
Like, these are the people who received the Old Testament canon. So by these premises, if I could say, like, these are the people where most of the studies that we would find from their scholars, like, for example, we can mention Josephus, who was a priest, a Pharisee, and Jewish historian, and then Philo, an Alexandrian Jew of the early first century. So my question, these people have mentioned, like, this canon has a specific number. They have given a specific number for the Old Testament. To mention some, Josephus, for example, has put there are 22 books of the Old Testament, but that doesn't mean like he has bunched some of the groups, so we can break them down, and then maybe we'll come to somewhere 37. I guess that's it. That would be the exact Josephus number. And then also Philo also has mentioned this same number, like 22, by dividing them into three categories, like the law, the prophets, and the psalm or hagiographics. These are the classifications. And then in this classification, he has put a different canon. So I'm coming to my question. Then do you think, like, there are some books we can classify them like not canonical but ecclesiastical books or writings? I can accept that, because these books have been given specifically to these specific people. And then can we also say, like, the apocryphal books, especially Jerome has mentioned also these things, the apocryphal books, when he translates the Hebrew to the Latin, I guess, if I'm right. So he has also put a specific number, but there are also some differences with these apocryphal books. So I don't have any objection in receiving these apocryphal books, as long as we classify them like the canonical and then the ecclesiastical books, because most of these apocryphal books, due to different reasons, they are not included in the Old Testament. In the book of Jerome, they have not been mentioned. Josephus hasn't mentioned some of them. Philo hasn't mentioned some of them. And then even the Babylonian Talmuds, we could get here and there some of the evidence that these apocryphal books are not exactly canonical, but they have been using this. Church fathers have been using these books just for the sake of edification of the people. They can read it, they can learn from it, but that doesn't mean that they are canonical. So that's how I understand them. And then, does history will support us in putting these books to the canon by all these evidences, mentioning Jerome, Josephus, Philo? Most of them are Jewish historians. So how do you see them? Like, can we say because Jude has mentioned them, or citation alone could be a criteria to put them as canonical? Because there are also, Paul also mentions some other books, some other books, and then he has mentioned that, I might have it now, but I can even Google it and find it. Like some of the mentions that Paul has put on his text are from philosophy. Some of them, because he mentioned them, does it mean that we have to go and bring that book and then put them in the Bible? So that's my short question. My English might not be good, but it's my.
You're doing great, man.
I don't mind. Sorry for my English.
No worries. So here's first of all, I want to say look at the gospel. You're the exact type of person, like you represent and you model what it should look like to have a conversation with someone who doesn't agree with you. I think you're the best example of it. We're of different faiths, different backgrounds, different ideologies. You always come here with respect. You always come here still trying to learn something, right? Even if you may not agree with the conclusion. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I wish we learn how to do that. And I know I'm learning from you just by your demeanor, your attitude. So I wanted to say thank you for that. The second thing is going back to what you're saying here. There's some premises I kind of disagree with. So the canon was not given to the Israelites. This is important to understand. The law was, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. And even if we understand New Testament theology, which I really like, I was debating myself, should I get into it or not? I don't want to get into it. But if we get into New Testament theology, just overview, God is working through the Israelites to save the world. But he wasn't trying to save the Israelites, right? Like, this is a very wrong kind of corrupted view of theology, of New Testament theology. God is working through the Israelites to save mankind, the world. But he's not saving. The thing is not about Israel. It's through Israel for humanity. But again, more importantly, there was no canon given to the people of the Israelites. Instead, what happened is things happened. People wrote it. A few years later, they said, "Hey, let's gather all these things together." Now, I'm speaking from a historical perspective. So when determining which books, I don't know how early you came on, but I was saying Bible should be thought of as not as a book, but as a library. So the question of canonization is really a question of which books do we include in our library, and which ones do we take out. And you ask a very intriguing question: is the mere mention of texts in the New Testament a qualifying factor for canonization? That's a great question. I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing: everyone can come up with their own canon, right? Okay, but you just have to justify it. And to the Ethiopian is like, yeah, I think so. Let's include it. At least we'll include the ones that we've included. I think that's one way to accept a canonization. And other people are like, nah, we should accept the Jews. All right. Okay, accept the Jews. I guess the major claim that I'm trying to make is why is the canonization of saying what the New Testament included, and by the way, of course, the fragments of the Book of Enoch was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I meant to mention this earlier in the 1950s. which shows that they were part of the tradition. I mean, people were interacting and engaging with it. Doesn't that mean that it's canon if it's being used alongside the other texts that were believed to be inspired? I think so. Now, you don't have to take my word for it, but I think it's a major claim to say that only the Jewish canon should be accepted. And that's when I push back and I'm like, but why is that necessarily so? What is it about the Jewish community's assessment that invokes this need to say they are right? I don't see a reason for that as a Christian. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, to some extent. Let me answer your last question, maybe if that helps for our conversation.
Sure.
As you have said, I agree with you. Like God chose, a specific people to save the world. So I think He started with Abraham, with a single person, and then through that person, all this Israel, become the whole nation, for the saving of the whole people. But I don't understand what you say. Like He's trying to save the world, but He's not, trying to save them. Did I hear it right? Or like
the goal wasn't to save the Israelites. The goal is to save the world, and God is working through the Israelites.
Yeah, but does that mean? I mean, if He's working through me, definitely He has to start by saving me and then convincing me first. So that's why God preached the gospel for Abraham, and then through his obedience, if Abraham obeys, and then he could be the vehicle for the whole world to be saved through him. So without saving him, how could He save others without saving, the guy himself or the nation itself?
So are you saying the Jews were saved?
No, I mean Abraham is saved, I guess. Do we agree on that? Is Abraham saved? Because
well, I mean, so in Romans, by the way, in Romans chapter 4, when it's talking about Abraham, it's important to understand why he's talking about Abraham. He's not trying to talk about the Jews. He's trying to talk about the Gentiles. And a lot of people forget about this. It's the fact that Abraham was justified by faith before having the law. And it is kind of an invitation for the Gentiles to join in this Christian kingdom to say your father, Abraham, who's supposed to be this like the grandfather of Judaism, believed before having the law. That you Jews say that the law is the most important thing. No, I'm telling you that faith in Christ is important. And and I'll show you how faith in God is important, in God's process, by the way. When it's talking about faith, it's not just saying the knowledge of God. It's saying the faith of the process of how God saves. And Abraham had faith in God's process before receiving the law. And that is what made him justified, right? Declared to be right with God. That's what we mean by justified. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so I think we can agree on some of the topics, maybe like Abraham is being saved. That's what I believe. So
sure.
Maybe through Abraham, God is trying to save the world. So I agree on that.
Here, for example, it says
Christianity comes out of Judaism as a sect when it started. So that's what I understand.
Sure. So here, for example, it says, "For you are not a true Jew just because you were born of Jewish parents or because you have gone through the ceremony of circumcision." This is Romans chapter 3, verses 28. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. And the true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law. Rather, it is a change of heart produced by the Spirit. And then, of course, it goes on to chapter 4, and then it says the faith of Abraham, and it starts to it starts to talk about Abraham. But before Abraham, again, it goes down, and it talks about how Christ took our punishment. So after all, is God the God of the Jews only? Isn't he also the God of the Gentiles? Of course he is. Therefore, there's only one God, and he makes people right with himself only by faith, whether they're Jews or Gentiles. Well, then, if we emphasize faith, does this mean that we can forget about the law? Of course not. In fact, only when we have faith do we truly fulfill the law, and then we get into Abraham. So here it's saying that God is saving mankind through the Jews, but the goal is not to save Jews. In fact, we were all Jews by faith. They kept this whole dichotomy of Jews, Gentiles, is to say, hey, you Jews don't snub. Don't go around saying, we got you here. You wouldn't be here without us. Don't do that. You Gentiles don't walk around saying the law doesn't matter. No. There's a balance, right? We wouldn't have been here without the law. And the Jews preserved, we got here to the New Testament because of the law, because of the Jews. But now we have faith in Christ. And that's what matters. Right?
Yeah, that's clear. I got your point now.
Yeah. So now with that in mind, when we were talking about I heard this one person saying God had a project, and I love that idea, right? Of saving the world. And that project of saving the world was not different in the Old Testament and New Testament. Now we're really getting into theology, which I try not to do on this channel, right? So he had this project of saving the world. These projects were not two different projects, one in old, one in new. The same project that got revealed in the new. The old, it was the same project, but the only difference in the new is we see the project. Before we didn't understand it, now we understand it. That being said, the texts, that the events and the things that kept happening, people recorded it. And the canonization is a fancy way of saying, officially, let us all gather here and decide what we're going to put in our library that we're going to call the Bible or the Torah or whatever. And the Jews, after Christ came, are the ones who said, let's do this. And by the way, while they were discussing, there were many ups and downs and debates. Aster barely made it. There were other texts. I think the book of Daniel barely made it. There were texts that almost didn't make the list. So my thing is, why should we trust them? They're not holy people in the sense of what we think, right? They're not inspired by the Holy Spirit. They can't be. They're Jews. They haven't accepted Christ. So why should I trust them?
That's very interesting. You got me there. Okay.
By the way, one thing I just have to say, and I know maybe Saturday people are going to ask this. I make this kind of big deal about the Book of Enoch, and I made a video on this. By the way, I took your advice. I don't know if you got a chance to see it. And it was okay, we need references ahead of this talk. So I've been uploading videos. I don't know if you saw it. And that's one of the reasons why I went to the Bible today, is because I sent videos ahead of time so people kind of could gauge what I'm going to talk about today. And anyway, on that videos on YouTube, people, there's certain pushbacks. Some needed, some not needed. And one of the biggest pushback I got is, well, the Book of Enoch wasn't written by Enoch. And I almost had a heart attack, right? And the whole logic, and this is a Christian saying this to me, the Book of Enoch was written the 3rd century or 4th century. And that's what scholarship says. We know Enoch didn't write it, so it cannot have been inspired by God. And I'm thinking, the same thing could be said about the Book of Daniel, by the way. If you look at scholarship today, the Book of Daniel is not believed to have been written by Daniel. But a lot of people say the Book of Enoch is apocrypha in nature. It talks about beasts and weird creatures. So does the Book of Daniel. There's a lot of terminologies that like need a lot of interpretation in the Book of Enoch. A lot of people ask me about the Book of Enoch. I'll push it to the. I can't. I don't have the expertise to like translate. It's really like hard, difficult to read. So is the Book of Daniel. And if you look at them hand to hand, whatever you say to like the Book of Enoch, I can say to the Book of Daniel. When we grew up, we had a saying in America. We used to say, "I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say sticks back to you." And that's my philosophy. Like any criticism that comes against the Book of Enoch, I can write back to it. And like I said, I can push really far in scholarship. I mean, I could really push far. Like, if we want to talk about scholarship and how these texts are not like real texts because they're not credible, and people cite like all these Western scholars, and I'm like, I can play that game toe to toe, because the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 2 are thoughts and scholarship today to be copies where they messed up, and the second chapter was supposed to be a copy of chapter 1. Are we going to accept this philosophy from scholarship? And in the story of Jericho, when they're trying to build, like when they're going around and they're blowing the trumpets and the wall breaks down, the scholarship suggests that the Jews were already in Jericho, like way after the wall had broken down. They had nothing to do with it. The obelisk that I said I don't want to get into. I could get into it right now. The what was it called? The black obelisk is a picture of the Jewish king paying tribute to the king of someone, Shalmaneser. In the Bible, it says the Jewish king defeated this king. But here in the archaeological evidence, it's the Jewish king paying tribute, going directly against what the Bible is saying. So are we going to take the scholarship? So when people begin to invoke scholarship, I'm like, oh, let's play that game. I'm ready to play that game. They will tell you when they crossed the Red Sea, it could not have been the Red Sea. It could not have been the Red Sea, because the direction that they were going, was it nowhere near the Red Sea? I learned all this at Catholic University. Thank you, Catholic. This is this is real scholarship that people are like, okay, that's what it is, and they've accepted. Are we going to accept it? I'm not. This is why I always say, when we talk about scholarship, I can go really far with this and show you like what scholarship is saying, and then what you're left with is with an empty hand. But I think, and why I'm here is to say, there's got to be responsible scholarship. There's got to be responsible scholarship where like you're like, okay, there are things from the tradition that I'm gonna believe. There are things from the scholarship. Some I'm gonna understand, some I'm not gonna understand. I will tell you right now, I do not care what scholarship says. Christ has died for me on the cross. There's nothing that anyone could say. No scholarship, no nothing, right? Like, this is like my faith. I believe in it. So this is why I always say, when we talk about scholarship, how far do you really want to go? Because I could go toe to toe with anyone. And that's the thing with the Book of Enoch. Now, when I go back to the Ethiopian tradition, one of the things that I say is, why is it this like scholarship claims being made only to the Ethiopian tradition? Only to the Ethiopian tradition. Like, if we play that game, let's play it. The woman who's about to sin, and all of them came and threw rocks at it. That's from a later edition. It's not in the earliest attestations of the Greek. So let's take it out. Let's erase all these things. The end of Mark chapter 16, the resurrection of Christ, not in earliest attentions. Let's delete all these things. That means that Matthew, Luke, John is believed to have copied Mark. Resurrection story is gone. I could push and push and push, and we're left with nothing. But I say, if we're going to do responsible scholarship, then let's be responsible throughout, including the Ethiopian tradition. This is why I say we are colonized of the mind. I believe we are colonized of the mind, and we say scholarship, but we only apply it for the Ethiopian section, not recognizing the rest of what they have to say. Like, how much of the world will we really believe?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's getting more interesting and interesting. So I will go. I will take a lot of things home. So thank you very much, Diakon. I really appreciate what you are doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me
thank
say
you.
this and let me go
Sure,
on.
please.
I love the saying, like, there is one saying, like Origin says in his commentary on Genesis, like, in matters of theology, absolute confidence is possible, like, for only two classes of people. One is saints and the other is idiots. And then, that's very interesting. So I think everybody should come with a heart, to learn a thing or two from anybody here, because we are all, going the same direction. We're in the same boat. We have to still figure out a lot of things. We have to read. We have to go deeper, both in our culture and then also in others. So you really got me there on the things that you have said in terms of our culture. I think it's very rich. So we have to respect that. And then we shouldn't always accept only whoever tastes from the Western people or the other people only. So we have to also accept our history, and then our tradition is also very important. So that's very interesting. I really appreciate what you are doing. Where was the platform that you have opened so that I could see it? Is that on YouTube?
YouTube, yes.
It's by your name, on your name?
Yeah, it's by my name, and then there's some videos that I
Okay.
released there.
Definitely, I'll learn a lot. Thank you very much, Diakon. I appreciate it.
All right, brother.
Have a good day.
All right, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. You're welcome anytime. If there are more questions, I can take one or two more.
Diakonia, someone asking something.
Okay.
09
Mm-hmm.
user 999.
Yeah, I can't accept it. He was asking me to bring him live. He doesn't have enough followers. I don't know what his question is, though.
Yeah,
I'm assuming he.
That's yeah. All right.
Okay. If there are no other related questions, yes, the minute that I shut out, it saves it automatically, so it'll be on YouTube. Yaredo, I'll skip that. Just to end in a positive note. Maybe that'll be another day. Gurum, why don't you go ahead and ask your question quickly, and if it's really out of pocket or out of topic, then
Is that right?
we can finish it another day.
Yeah, it's just like, I was gonna ask about the Pope. Can I call him Pope?
The patriarch?
Yeah, who was tapped in while he's teaching the God words.
I'm not sure. I know this. No worries, Yaredo.
Yeah, because most Ethiopian Orthodox, most of them, I don't, but listen to him, and really he has when he talk, he has the same Ethiopian Orthodox, the way he talk. He telling about the God and everything, that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I think he's from Egypt, Alexandria, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe I don't. I'm not sure who it is.
Yeah, he's a pope. Guys, please, can someone write something about the pope who gets stopped in Australia?
Omar Mari?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
No.
he's excommunicated. That's why he was a Coptic Orthodox.
No, he's not Orthodox, isn't it?
He he was, and then he was excommunicated. So he's not. He is not of our church any longer. He was.
Did you guys hear that? Yeah. Because most of my friends, they really listen to him, and you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, he's not Orthodox. He was, but he took up a doctrine. I forget exactly which doctrine it was, but he's no longer Orthodox.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question.
Perfect. All right, guys. It's been fun. I hope that you guys have learned something. In summary, we were talking about the Ethiopian tradition. I think next week I really wanted to go through the Abba Garima Gospels. Maybe I'll do that next week. I think they're fascinating things. So we're gonna try to maybe look. We need one day of that. I think they're really exciting, pretty cool stuff. So maybe we'll look at that next week because I think we can learn a lot. For today, the takeaway message is there are different canons within the Bible. When you're talking about Bible canon, again, think about a library. And which library are you going to? Are you going to a library that has a little bit of books or big books? And what you find in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition is we have more books than other libraries. Now, that in itself, I don't think should be contentious. What is problematic to me is when other people are saying our libraries is wrong. That's when I start to push back, and I'm like, wait, why is it wrong? And then we get into these conversations, and of course, the other libraries or Bibles were canonized by according to what Jewish scholars said. I don't understand why that has to be necessarily true. Who said they were right? And again, part of decolonizing the mind is going back and relearning some of the things that we've learned. Why is the outside world correct? Why are we wrong? A lot of the times I hear this kind of premise of like, but the rest of the world is saying this. And my thing is, so what? I'm part of the world. I'm part of the world. We are part of the world. So what? And we've got to do a real, by the way, after we get through history and we really talk about the things that we need to talk about, we're going to talk about decolonizing the mind and really like thinking about certain things. For example, do you guys believe that there was a World War I and World War II? Have you guys heard of that? Who believes that there was a World War I and World War II? Say yes if you have, or no if you haven't. Who believes or has heard of World War I or World War II? All right. Here's the question. Has the world been at war ever? Has the world ever been at war? It's not true, though. This is a lie. The world has never been at war. Europeans were at war. Nations were at war. Africa was not at war. The so-called World War I was a war among Europeans and Western civilizations. It had nothing to do with Africa. But because history is written from a Eurocentric perspective, the war that they fought was written and preserved as World War I. And then they passed it down to us. We say, oh, remember World War I? No. We're part of the world, but we didn't fight. It had nothing to do with us. It wasn't our fight. It was Europeans who fought. And this is what we call colonization of the brain. This is what we call Eurocentric approach of history. where you say something happened in Europe, ergo must be the world. Conversations took place in Europe about which Bibles to include or which books to include in the Bible, ergo it must be universal. But why is that necessarily true? I don't have an answer to that. So here's why this idea of saying whatever the world has said is necessarily true. No, it's not. We must push back to it again. These are kind of the conversations that we're going to continue to have, working to decolonize the mind, really appreciating the mind, the philosophy, the culture, the history of Ethiopia. This is really key, guys, and freeing ourselves of the century-old kind of inferior complexity that Frantz Fanon talks about. One of the things I'm thinking about doing on this channel is just sitting down and reading Frantz Fanon, Black Skin's White Mask. Perhaps that's an exercise we need to do. So it's been fun. Love you guys. If you haven't followed me, follow me. If you haven't shared, well, I guess we're about to hang up now. But I'll see you guys on Saturday at 11:30 a.m. Those of you guys who could join again. Make sure to tell your friends, that people know. Let's learn about history. By the way, whenever you guys come here, let other people know that this channel is up and people are learning, so that more and more people learn, right? It's motivation to me, knowing that people are really learning and taking something out of it. So invite your friends, come, let's discuss for about an hour or two, and we call it a day. There's one in English, one in Amharic. Love you guys. See you guys next week.
All right.